From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Anne-Marie Hordern, I'm Joe Matthew.
The Fed makes its move, hiking rates another quarter point. Chair Powell defends the decision despite issues in the banking sector and welcomes a probe.
We're doing a review of supervision and regulation. My only interest is that we identify what went wrong here. How did this happen?
And as Congress prepares to hold hearings on what led to the SVB collapse, we'll talk to senators of both parties. Michael Bennet of Colorado and Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia coming up this hour.
And TikTok, the popular social media platform, has become a punching bag in Congress. And the company's CEO is set to testify in front of a congressional committee tomorrow.
Some politicians have started talking about banning TikTok. Now, this could take TikTok away from all 150 million of you.
We'll speak with the DHS official in charge, Robert Silvers, Undersecretary for Strategy, Policy, and Plans. Joe, tomorrow it is going to be all TikTok. And the CEO coming out asking his users, comment if you want your elected officials not to ban this platform that you come to know and love. Not just users like the young people we associate TikTok with, but 5 million American businesses. Yeah. That have a pipeline to customers through TikTok. Are they going to cut that off? Yeah, exactly. That's one of the big ones. Obviously, the big story, of course, is the Fed and also the Treasury Secretary. Yeah. Potentially moving markets, her as well. A lot of people were watching Jay Powell, as we might expect in our special coverage, but right at that same point, Janet Yellen makes news on the other side of the Capitol. You have to wonder who is scheduling her hearing and with his press conference. Maybe they didn't want us to watch it. Yeah. She did move markets, though, didn't she? Yeah, she did, and as did he. And that's what we're going to be discussing. Joining us now around the table are Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove and Kate Davidson. Before we both get into your takes of today, Powell, Yellen, inflation, banking crisis, let's hear what Jay Powell had to say. Take a listen.
It's too early to say, really, whether these events have had much of an effect. It's hard for me to see how they would have helped the possibility, but I guess I would just say it's too early to say whether there really have been changes in that. You know, the question will be how long this period is sustained.
Jay Powell there. Markets have closed, so I want to get your take just quickly, the politics of this. All these questions, so much about it was about the banking crisis. And he's welcoming now an outside probe, almost siding with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's called him a dangerous man.
Well, there have been a number of lawmakers, Emery, who've come out and said, yeah, this probably should be something that folks outside of the Fed take a look at. So the Fed announced last week that they were going to launch an internal investigation. That's going to be led by the Fed Vice Chair for Supervision, Michael Barr. And Powell said today, that he's not going to be involved in that because that was an issue that some folks had that, how can he, what is it going to look like if he plays a role in this? He says he's not going to. Nevertheless, there are Democrats and Republicans who think it would be better to have someone outside. Maybe that could be Congress, maybe that could be NIG. They haven't been really specific. But Powell essentially said today, look, we always expected that there would be an outside investigation, and we welcome it. So I don't think he could have answered any other way, though, right?
Leon Cooperman said 25 bips and done when he talked to Bloomberg a couple of days ago. Is that what we heard today from Jay Powell?
Not really. Okay. I mean, if we look at the projections that Fed officials put out, which they put out new ones today, they basically said that they see the potential for rates to move a little bit higher, maybe just another quarter basis point hike. But Powell was really non-committal. It was very conditional on how things continue to develop. But essentially, the message from Powell and the Fed today was that they're still more worried about inflation, which is a problem they know they have right now and they've had for quite a while, than they are worried about the possibility that this banking turmoil could spill into the broader economy.
Right. So Powell went with inflation, and he, instead of saying, we could go with potentially the concerns in the financial markets. How difficult of a position does this make the Biden administration? Because the Republicans on Capitol Hill have come to Joe and I over the course of the past week saying they have to keep hiking rates because inflation, which is induced by Biden's fiscal spending.
Yeah, I think, we're at a point where Biden is sort of stepping a little bit back from the fray, saying, look, we've taken the steps that we want to take not only on the debt ceiling fight, which is sort of at a standoff right now, but also on stabilizing the bank situation and also on doing what they can to try to, ease inflation, which of course is still running way too high. But Biden has been trying to put a friendly face on. And so I think we're going to continue to see him do that. Just say, look, it's up to Congress to come to me and to talk about a debt ceiling situation, which of course technically he's not negotiating on, as we all know, never. Just a concurrent negotiation on fiscal reform. And it's up to Congress to do more on oversight of what happened with banks. And so I think, he's trying to, really be left not holding the bag, or make sure that he doesn't get up from the chair, to use a different analogy, in musical chairs, and not be caught with that one. So I think, there's a lot of sort of team soft landing people in Dem world, Biden eco world, and I think, this feels today does not feel like, it feels like team no landing is like seizing the day. And so I think the uncertainty is still hanging over the White House a lot.
This White House has been so deliberate about maintaining independence from the Fed. Every time you ask a question that even gets close to it, you hear the disclaimer. Donald Trump
Other than hiring the Fed's vice chair.
Fair enough.
Right. Other than that,
Donald Trump would have tweeted at Jay Powell today, probably a couple of times, right? It's hard to actually bring ourselves back to that point. So how concerned is this president about the lagging impact of another hike?
Well, I think, they talk a lot. The phrasing they use is we want to preserve the gains in the labor market. And what they mean by that, you don't have to squint too closely to say, we don't want to put millions of people out of work to bring inflation down. And, if it's not too far a leap to say that, well, if you think that, then you might be okay with inflation running a tad high, so lower than now, but higher than target, if it means millions of more people are at work, particularly heading into an election year. And of course, we're waiting on Joe Biden to make that big announcement. So, we'll see. But they've been very tight-lipped this week. They've been very tight-lipped today about all this, the bank crisis, and of course, Lael Brainerd's replacement. We still don't know when they're going to name a new vice chair, who they're looking at. The signal has been that there's one front runner. We just, has any of this changed their calculus? They don't want to say. They haven't indicated publicly. They don't really want to indicate privately. There's a lot of balls in the air right now for them.
That was going to be my next question. Where are we on the vice Fed chair search? I mean, the Fed, we have 6% inflation. The Fed is technically in somewhat of a crisis. 3 banks just failed. They do not have a number 2. How is this not, agenda item number 1 for the administration?
Well, I think that, they do have, it's important to note that Dodd-Frank created essentially 2 number 2s, if you will. So they have a vice chair for supervision and regulation in Michael Barr. And really, he's the person, I think, who has, would take the lead in addressing some of this. As I mentioned, he is going to be leading that internal review. So they do have that. And I think before this all happened, it was a very high priority for them. They had said they wanted to move quickly to get someone in there because of inflation just being very high. My sense is that it's just a problem of all the decision makers are so preoccupied with what's happening with the banks right now. So I think if, as they say, things are calming down, they have some of this panic sort of contained, they'll turn back to this decision fairly quickly. But you're right, it's certainly taken their eye off of that decision for now.
If you've been with us on Balance of Power for the last week and a half here, you've been hearing us every day talk about the cap on FDIC deposit insurance. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have weighed in on this, and it seemed to be that the Treasury was looking for a short-term solution here. Doesn't seem so much what we heard today from the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in the testimony Anne Marie mentioned today on Capitol Hill. Listen.
I have not considered or discussed anything having to do with blanket insurance or guarantees of all deposits.
So we're not going to see progress on this, Josh? Is this not something that the White House was considering? I thought they were backing all deposits, at least tacitly.
Well, first of all, what does blanket deposits mean? I mean, there's a lot of ways that they could land this in between that. But she is pumping the brakes for sure. And of course, we've had reporting at Bloomberg that they have looked at options, saying less out of thinking they will need them, but more that they know, like, hey, what does that button do if we press it? Like, what powers do they have? And so that reporting was that they think that they might, have executive powers under emergency authorities, or at least they were studying whether they do, to temporarily offer guarantees. So it's a bit up in the air. But part of the reason they're sensitive, and I think part of the reason Secretary Yellen said that today, is they are really of the mind that this is not on a downslope, that things are not continuing to get worse. They think that things are stabilized. No one's saying they're out of the woods. But I think, that's why they're wary of talking about, hey, well, if it gets worse, what are you going to do? What's step X? What's step Y? What's step instead of Z, or Z as we would say in Canada, naturally.
It's a due diligence.
They don't want to go there. They don't want to go there because, of course, if you think about, oh, hey, we need 10 more fire trucks in here, everyone's going to ask, well, oh, shoot, the fire's getting bigger, right? So that's where they're at.
I'll tell you what, though, Anne-Marie, after First Republic today, 20% deposit withdrawal, I'm surprised this is the day she chose to say that.
Yeah, but I do think Josh makes a good point. Is it that term, blanket deposits? Right. Is it the nuance in her wording?
So there could be shades of
because
insurance.
we know that they are looking at it as a due diligence point of view, but potentially she was trying to pump the brakes on what the spectrum of those deposits.
We'll say
look
this
like.
conversation isn't over yet.
Yeah.
Great to have Josh Wingrove and Kate Davison. Many thanks for being with us today on Balance of Power. Coming up, TikTok. It's all about TikTok. Preparing for its battle with Congress tomorrow, we'll talk to Robert Silvers, Undersecretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Everybody's talking about TikTok.
There are a lot of us that are concerned about privacy.
The risks of insecure information and communication technologies.
We need Congress to move beyond the whack-a-mole solution that we have been focused on. I do think we're going to pass this.
U.S. lawmakers considering legislation that could lead to a ban of TikTok. The company's CEO, Shu Chu, taking his message to the app's users directly ahead of testimony on Capitol Hill. Listen.
Some politicians have started talking about banning TikTok. Now, this could take TikTok away from all 150 million of you. I'll be testifying before Congress later this week to share all that we're doing to protect Americans using the app and deliver on our mission to inspire creativity and to bring joy.
So he's really going after the users. Thousands have commented on this, saying, yes, we want to be able to keep our app.
150 million
and
users?
All these individuals have they have elected officials.
That's correct. And there are 5 million businesses on there, which he really went out of his way to remind everybody of. It's not just teenagers on TikTok. It's become a major conduit for business.
Right. And the CEO will be testifying tomorrow in front of the U.S. House Committee on Energy and Commerce. And here with us to discuss this now is Robert Silvers. He's the Undersecretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Robert, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure you've seen this I come in peace moment from the CEO of TikTok, and he's trying to really rally these users to reach out to their elected officials. I know that TikTok is under review by the U.S. government with CFIUS, but I have some reporting that the U.S. government has actually told ByteDance, your best bet, either to face a ban or sell it. Where do things stand right now?
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Joe. Good to be on the show, and congratulations on the new show. Our administration has national security concerns about this app, and that's actually why President Biden last year signed legislation that banned the app from federal government phones. We have concerns about any app or any technology that's subject to Chinese government control, where you're talking about access to huge troves of Americans' personal data. The way the Chinese system works is if the Chinese government asks for data that a company there has, the company has to provide it, period. And when you're talking about an environment in which Americans in large numbers are giving their location data, who they're talking to, what they like to do online, that becomes really, really significant and becomes a national security concern, especially so when kids are involved and when a lot of users are young. That also becomes a concern from a national security perspective of, do we want to empower the Chinese government to push its agenda, its propaganda, its information flow into the United States? So that's something we also think about as well in the context of any app, any technology that's going to be ultimately reporting into the Chinese government. So CFIUS is looking at this. It's something we take seriously.
As we learned, the app is also home to 5 million businesses. It's not just millions of teenagers out there, Robert. Is there a concern in the department about undercutting or compromising businesses that are using this as a pipeline to their customers?
we're extremely supportive in every respect in this administration of small and medium-sized businesses. I think when you're looking at the penetration of an app or a technology and considering what its national security implications are, if the usage is becoming more and more widespread, that can actually grow the level of national security concern that you develop, because ultimately in whose control are these technologies and what happens to the users that are on them. And so it's our job in the security agencies of the federal government as part of the CFIUS process to be really vigilant to what risks are we putting Americans into with technologies and apps that are under control of governments like China, like Russia, or otherwise.
You know that TikTok, of course, has been pushing this Project Texas plan. They want to isolate U.S. user data in the United States. I recently spoke to a source, though, that said that just because TikTok says this is an unprecedented way of securing data doesn't mean it's sufficient. What you know about Project Texas, do you think it would be enough to protect users' data?
So I want to respect the CFIUS process here. We have a lot of security agencies that come together and look at things from every angle, and we have negotiations as part of that. And I don't want to violate those discussions. But I will say that we're looking at all cases like this very, very closely, no question about it. And we're looking at all the tools available for cases that involve pernicious influence by, for example, the Chinese government or others. That includes CFIUS, which is a really strong set of tools. But we're also working with Capitol Hill. We've been really pleased to see bipartisan legislation that has been advanced by Senator Warner and Senator Thune, a Democrat and a Republican, that would equip the administration with additional authorities, additional tools to get at risks where you have technology deployments that are putting in jeopardy sensitive American technology, sensitive critical infrastructure, or sensitive personal data. And so this is really something where we're bringing a lot of capability to bear, and it's been terrific to see bipartisan consensus come together in that respect, and why the White House has endorsed that bill.
I'm just curious, Robert, if you can tell our viewers, knowing this is the most popular app in the world, 150 million people are watching this unfold right now in Washington. What do they need to know? Are there files on all of them in China? What do they know about their movements or their personal routines, their shopping habits, et cetera?
Well, I'm going to say at the general level that whenever you have a technology that ultimately reports up into China, it's at the mercy of the Chinese government under their legal system. If the Chinese government requests data, that data has to be provided. And so when we think about lots and lots of users doing their most sensitive communications, work, where they are, what they like, we're just going to take that incredibly seriously. And that's something that I think users need to account for. I think it's something parents need to account for. It's certainly something that the security agencies of the United States government are going to account for. And that's what we're doing.
Robert, just quickly, earlier this month, there was a new cybersecurity release from the Biden administration. It's about the software, not just the companies that use that software, that really need to go in and shore up some of this cybersecurity, these guardrails, I would say, potentially putting the administration on a little bit of a crash course with the tech companies. Where does your outreach stand right now with those software companies?
So when it comes to cybersecurity, we see enough attempted and successful intrusions every single day to know that it is no time to be complacent. The threat landscape when it comes to cyber is as menacing as ever. Everything from advanced nation-state actors to ransomware gangs. And this is the kind of thing that can really bring a company to its knees with no notice whatsoever. It can be operating, and all of a sudden it's lost access to its communications, its ability to reach customers, to reach counterparties. And so this is something that needs to be taken extremely seriously by government, but also by those in the financial services sector and every other part of our economy. The good news is that defense matters. And there is a lot of high-impact, low-cost steps that companies can take. Every day at the Department of Homeland Security, we're working with companies, including small and medium-sized businesses, to share information about threats, to get them free resources in how they can assess their own security, and to give them frameworks to make sure that they're defending up. You know, in Ukraine, as it was clear that Russia was going to invade, the Ukrainian government really accelerated their work on cyber defense. And all in all, they have been much more successful in repelling Russian cyber attacks over the last year than anybody expected possible. And it goes to show that defense matters, but you have to take the steps. And CEOs and board directors need to put their hands on the wheel and work with us to do that. And every day we're doing that with more and more companies.
Robert, thank you so much for that insight. Robert Silvers, Undersecretary for Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. Still ahead on the program, Chair Powell reacts to turmoil in the banking sector.
It's 100% certainty that there will be independent investigations and outside investigations and all that. When a bank fails, there are investigations, and of course, we welcome that.
More from Powell, plus the takeaways from Treasury Secretary Yellen, her testimony as well. That's coming up. This is Balance of Power. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. We have some breaking news coming from Bloomberg reporting. Coinbase received a Wells notice from SEC staff. This is what it says. Notice says staff made a preliminary determination to recommend that the SEC file enforcement action alleging violations of federal securities law. I know Shonali Basak has been all over this story, and this is something we'll be delivering more from you. But this is Coinbase Global. They say they got a Wells notice from the SEC staff. Markets today getting whipsawed as investors react to the Fed decision, and comments as well from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Here to take us through it all is Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons. Hey, Kayleigh.
Well, these two were speaking at the same time and in some sense contradicting themselves, because you had Chairman Powell in the press conference saying, we have shown you we have the tools to protect depositors. We are willing and able to do that if necessary. At the same time, you had Treasury Secretary Yellen saying in testimony on the Hill, we aren't going to do anything blanketly in terms of ensuring all deposits. Very hard for the market to figure out who exactly is actually right on that front. But what the end result was tanking stocks, and bank stocks in particular, because we're still very concerned about deposit flight. My goodness. A lot of cross currents today. Kayleigh, thank you. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, Washington faces the aftermath of Silicon Valley Bank's collapse. We'll have Senator Michael Bennet with us next. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. I'm Joe Matthew here with Anne-Marie Hordern with breaking news on Coinbase. The shares are down about 7% after hours, as we just told you. Breaking news here on the terminal with a redhead. Coinbase Global says it got a Wells notice from SEC staff, and we're learning a little bit more about this, Anne-Marie. This smacks of Kraken, I have to admit. We're talking about relating to the spot market and staking service. So Gary Gensler strikes again.
Yeah, and also a lot of concern, obviously, because investors potentially facing all these losses, but this comes after we know the SEC is looking into Sam Bankman-Fried and his crypto exchange company. Lots of questions swirling around Washington, especially with ones we've talked to about how they're potentially should not regulate this.
Versus the whack-a-mole approach. And Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons is here with a little bit more on this. How lucky we are to have the anchor of our crypto show with us here. Kayleigh, does this, in fact, feel like the latest whack-a-mole from the SEC chair?
Yeah, and we've seen these increasing in their frequency. There has been a lot of enforcement actions as of late. I would note that this is not directly an enforcement action. A Wells notice indicates one may be coming, so we'll look for more clarity on that. But Coinbase has received these Wells notices before. The thing we hear so often from Coinbase and other crypto companies is that the SEC is regulating by enforcement, because there is still such a jurisdictional question over what the SEC has control of versus the CFTC when it comes to crypto. The SEC, of course, wants to define most digital tokens as securities and wants the exchanges like Coinbase to register them with the SEC. There is a question among the community as to whether or not that securities definition is really applicable to digital assets, which is why we have seen such enforcement actions. The case, for example, between Ripple and the SEC. So this is an ongoing conversation. The reason why Coinbase, of course, is so significant is, as you said, Joe, we're able to actually quote the share move because this is a huge public company, the largest publicly listed exchange here in the U.S. So this is going to be one to watch in the coming days.
Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons. Many thanks for the analysis, Kayleigh. As Washington weighs next steps amid this national banking crisis, we kind of connect the dots here with the help of Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado. Senator, it's great to see you. We welcome you back to Bloomberg. This news is just breaking about Coinbase, but it's just kind of the latest salvo from the SEC, while many lawmakers call for a more concerted, comprehensive approach to regulating crypto. What's your reaction to what you're seeing today? Is this the right direction?
Thank you for having me again. I think we're going to have to look at all of this. I mean, the people that I represent in Colorado are the ones that are buffeted by these, ups and downs in our banking sector. They noticed that one of the banks that, has gotten into trouble recently had about a fifth of its assets were in crypto, and they wonder about that. And I think the question we really need to be asking ourselves, though, is what actually happened here? Let's understand the decisions that were made that put Silicon Valley Bank in particular in the trouble that was in, and then legislate as a result of that knowledge instead of just reacting to today's headlines. That's not going to put us in the right place in the long run, I don't think.
Speaking of what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, you had Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on the Hill today, and she said that there won't be any sort of blanket insurance with the FDIC when it comes to banks. At the same time, I know in Congress, a lot of lawmakers are debating whether or not the FDIC should be lifted. Should the timeframes be extended right now, given the crisis? Where do you stand when it comes to this debate?
I've heard some suggestions where people have said maybe we should figure out a way to put a 2-year moratorium on all this, where we just say we're going to insure deposits for 2 years until we can figure out the regime that we need to put in place. I think some legitimate questions have been raised in the wake of this about what purpose is served in having some of these deposits insured, some of these deposits uninsured, or drawing that line at $250,000. And again, these are all things that we should be looking at. We should be having hearings. We should have experts come in and testify. I think in the long run, what we need to make sure that we're doing is that the American people and the businesses that they own have access to capital at every level of the economy. That we regulate this in a way that makes sense for the very largest banks that may be very different from the way we want to regulate things for smaller, more rural banks. One of the things I was very concerned about coming out of the 9/10 downturn was that our small businesses, our farmers, and many rural folks lost access to banks, partly as a result of the downturn, but also partly as a result of the increased fixed costs that we were then requiring because of concerns, very well-founded concerns, about regulations of the largest banks in America. This Congress, at some point, is going to have to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time and have a rational set of regulations that drives economic growth and protects the American consumer and protects small businesses all across the country.
Senator, this is all coming against the backdrop of what's supposed to be a budget debate and a debate over raising the debt ceiling, neither of which seem to be moving the needle at all. I remember talking to you about your real deal when you were running for president. You proposed something called Medicare X. We don't even have entitlements on the table right now, Senator. So what is there to negotiate as Republicans in the House call for cuts?
Well, first of all, thanks for noticing that I ran for president. Almost nobody did, and I appreciate that very much. It doesn't happen very often, and I think that what we need to have is a serious discussion in this country about how we bring our revenue line and our cost line into line with each other. We haven't done that since both of those things were about 19% of our GDP, and actually what I've heard mostly on the Republican side is that they're saying these days, well, we don't want to touch these programs either, like Medicare or Social Security, because they're so popular. I do think there are important reforms we could make on the health care side that would drive costs down for the American people and make these programs less expensive over time. I think that we could lift the cap on the Social Security tax, and that would help keep Social Security solvent. But I also think we can't can't ignore the revenue side of this. You know, the reality is that the permanent extension of the Bush tax cuts, which I voted against, the Trump tax cuts, you know, the vast majority of which went to the very top 1% of people in this country, top 5% of people in this country. Those are, and that we borrowed all money from the American people, from police officers and firefighters and teachers. Yeah. We never paid for any of that. You know, I think that all these things together we're going to have to put in the middle of the table. In the meantime, it would be useful and constructive for us not to blow up the credit rating of the United States of America by tripping over the debt ceiling, which is simply political. This is politics at its worst, and we should not, let's have an agreement that says, let's not make matters worse for stupid politics, and instead get people into a room and have them have a real negotiation.
Senator Bennett, while I love talking about the debt ceiling, I want to ask your questions about TikTok, because the CEO will be on Capitol Hill tomorrow, who you met in February. But Shu Chu has said, let me state this unequivocally, ByteDance is not an agent of China or any other country. Having spent time with this executive, Senator, do you believe him?
Well, I don't have any reason to think he's not saying what he believes is true, and he's, because we live in a free country, I'm glad he's coming to testify. He, of course, is from Singapore, not from China or not from Beijing, and we're going to need to listen to what he says. I can tell you I found him completely unconvincing on the stuff that I cared about. Wow. And the idea that, you know, we should somehow turn a blind eye when ByteDance wholly owns TikTok, and ByteDance, notwithstanding what Mr. Shu says, is subject to the privacy laws of the CCP, which could lead to the CCP forcing TikTok to disgorge their data if they chose to do that. In my office, he actually said that was true, that recitation of the law was true. Now he's saying something different, and I'm not saying he's saying something untrue. I'm just saying it's not the same thing he said when he talked to me. And the more important point, or another important point to me, is at the end of his testimony, I read it today, he makes the point that TikTok is not available in China. There's a reason for that. They call it digital opium there. You know, they are happy to export something here that 150 million Americans are consuming 3 weeks a year, you know, on a platform that's run by the CCP that may serve their interests in hoovering up data from the American people. I can see why he'd be interested in protecting that. I think the American people have the imagination, if we chose to choose a different platform, and I think that's what we should do.
Senator, thank you so much for your time, and I'm just going to assume you are not on TikTok. That's Colorado Senator Michael Bennett.
I am not. Don't tell my kids. Don't tell them.
All right, coming up, more on TikTok. We're going to continue that conversation. But now, with Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, this is Balance of Power. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. Joe, what a fascinating conversation with the senator there.
Yeah, people get animated about TikTok. I mean, whether you're talking to a teenager or a lawmaker in Washington, it really gives you a sense of how animated this hearing is probably going to be tomorrow.
And the CEO will be there on Capitol Hill, Shu Chu. Already, he has given this outreach to users, wanting them to basically call their elected officials, like Senator Bennett, and say, please, keep our social media. But he spent time with this individual, and the quote was, he found it unconvincing.
At best, he said, which means he didn't believe a word of it.
Scariest times. Ahead of TikTok CEO testimony, at least for him, to Congress tomorrow, Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia joins us to discuss. Senator, you're going to be in the room. What's your first question to the CEO?
Well, I guess my first question would be, what kind of data are you gathering and what kind of information are you gathering from all the TikTok users here in this country, and what are you doing with it? And see if we can get any truth from this. My expectations are very low, I think, like my fellow Senator Bennett was just explaining.
So, Senator, explain to us, why not just block the talk, as Marco Rubio says? He has his own bill that would specifically deal with this specific company. I realize that the other legislation gives a much more broad approach, tools to the Treasury that might also apply to other companies. But we're talking about TikTok. The CEO is in town. People are worried about privacy on this platform, the most popular app out there. Why not just ban it?
Well, I think, I think we should look at that. Certainly, the Restrict Act does have, the one that I'm on has a much broader view. It looks at other implications, whether it would be Huawei and other companies that could be having an effect on mining data and violating privacy, grooming people for certain behaviors, and all these kinds of things that we see going on in TikTok. I think that to ban what I understand the way young people in this country now are communicating through TikTok, I think is a bigger question, and maybe that's where we end up. But for right now, I think we ought to have a risk-based profile at how we're looking at these companies and what they're actually doing to us, and I think that will be the meat of a lot of the questions tomorrow.
Senator, the legislation you're signing up behind, how is that going in terms of getting the individuals you need on the House side to want to make sure that that's the piece of legislation, giving the Commerce Department a lot more of this weight to block some of these potential foreign, whether or not it's technology or other insights into the U.S. marketplace? Do you think House lawmakers are also going to sign up for your act?
Well, I think what we have to look at here, and the reality of the Senate, honestly, is that we have to have 10 people from either one party or the other join with the other party to get something through. So the sponsors of this bill, which were Senator Thune and Senator Warner, very methodically added a Republican and a Democrat at the same time. I'm one of the original co-sponsors of their bill for this very reason, because that strengthens the bill. It also, as I said, it has a much broader look. It also has a greater chance of passing if you already have buy-in from both sides, obviously. And so when it goes to the House, I think the determinations on the House will be, does it go far enough? And maybe the House would want to flat out ban TikTok. Then it has to come into a conference committee. Senator Rubio has a different view of this and a different way of looking at it. What did you say? Ban the talk? So I think that
block the talk.
Block the talk. Block the talk. I should have gotten.
It's all about the alliterations and the rhyming on Capitol Hill, right, Senator? I have to ask you though. I know this is beat on TikTok week, and it is its own unique story. But how concerned are you about foreign investors potentially getting personal data or having access to the algorithm at Twitter? Is this not a social media-wide issue?
No, I'm very concerned about the Chinese getting any further into whether it's farmland, whether it's an app, whether it's our universities with our Confucius institutions, whether it's buying up our energy assets here, or I was just in Mexico where they're buying energy assets there. All of this is extremely concerning because I think it has ramifications going forward. It strikes at our power, it strikes at our innovation, and in the case of TikTok and other things, it goes to our young people, which are the minds of tomorrow. They're going to be formulating what direction they want this company, and the preservation of our democracy even, is that big. So I think these are very concerning issues, and I think that we need to be, at this point, at least giving the Commerce Department the tools to be able to restrict based on risks, but also looking further and saying is the next punitive action actually blocking the talk? Maybe that is the direction that we go.
I'm glad you brought up your congressional delegation to Mexico. I know you met with President AMLO. How confident are you that they are going to crack down at the ports when it comes to these precursors of fentanyl coming into Mexico and then, of course, into the United States?
Well, we know that fentanyl is coming through the southern border and into our states, my state, for certainly. And so we talked with him, quite frankly, and said the precursors are coming in from China. They're coming into your ports. He has taken much action in terms of putting the military in charge of ports inspections to try to, get rid of the corruption. He talked about that a lot, but he also went a little bit further, I think, with us, in that he said that he would be more forceful, more face-to-face, and with the Chinese to cut back on the precursors of this deadly substance that's killing Americans, and it's also feeding the cartels and the corruption in Mexico. So I felt like it was a very definitive statement that he made. We talked a lot about cooperation. We talked about a lot of things we're concerned about with migration and other things. But I think, we are partners here, both of our countries. We need to enhance ourselves as a unit, because I think that's going to be stronger in terms of precursors to fentanyl, but also in terms of the migration going through our southern border, their northern border.
Senator, there's a lot more we'd like to talk to you about. I hope you'll come back and see us again soon. Thank you for the insights today. West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito with us.
All righty. Thanks a lot.
Bloomberg. Coming up, President Trump's legal troubles in the spotlight, and he's talking again. A new statement just out. We'll have more on that conversation ahead with our political panel. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Anne-Marie Hordern. So it's on in Florida. Ron DeSantis punching back against Donald Trump. Listen.
What is your favourite nickname that Trump's given you so far? Is it Ron DeSanctimonious or Meatball Ron?
Well, I can't.
I think even he went off Meatball Ron.
I can't. I don't know how to spell DeSanctimonious. I don't really know what it means, but I kind of like. It's long. It's got a lot of vowels. I mean, so we go with that. That's fine. You can call me whatever you want.
Ron DeSantis talking with Piers Morgan. Apparently, that is the platform he chose to throw back on Donald Trump. And we bring in our political panel. Joe Crowley's here, Debt and Public Policy Senior Policy Director, of course, former New York Congressman, along with Lauren Tomlinson, Steer PR partner, former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at DHS. Lauren, I'm going to start with you because this is the moment you've been waiting for. Donald Trump just put out a statement. It's very long in response. It says, in short here, Ron is an average governor, but the best by far in the country in one category, public relations. I guess we don't have to wait for the debate stage. It's on now.
Yeah, it's on. And I think it's interesting how restrained Ron DeSantis has been in regards to not engaging yet. You saw in that interview with the clip that you played, he's making the case very early that he is the governor of Florida. He's going to wait until the legislative session is over in May before he really starts engaging, although you see all of these soft plays into the presidential. So I'm interested to see what happens when he actually announces, the contrast that he paints, how he handles Trump's attacks, because obviously Trump has been kind of going after him for a while since he's, second in the polls for all accounts, an early favorite for the presidential. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be an interesting race, right?
That's for sure.
Interesting because everyone's been waiting for Ron DeSantis to say something back. How do the Democrats play this?
Well, that was probably more personality I've seen out of Ron DeSantis ever. And I'd served with him in the House of Representatives for a couple of years. He was a very demure member of Congress, very to himself. I mean, look, this has a long ways to go. I think, Democrats are still eyeing Donald Trump at this point, knowing that there are other players out there. And really, who's going to win this primary? That's what it really comes down to. So I don't think there's really much focusing on anyone else at this point until they have a better idea of who they're actually facing.
So this is going to be the contest, though, right? Or do you expect that he will, in fact, he's losing weight, he's making all the signals to your point, they're actually going to have a race together?
Yeah, losing weight's definitely a telltale sign.
That's the key, yes.
And a book. As I say, book, early state, Iowa, New Hampshire visits, donor meetings. No, I don't think this is the race, to be honest.
Okay.
I think that there's still a long way to go. We have a very long time until elections. I think that you'll remember almost every Republican primary, there's the highs, there's the lows, there's the early winners, and then they drop out. So I think it's too early to tell. I'm very curious to see how it goes. Does Trump stay in? There's a lot of questions there. Does Tim Scott get in? Does Pompeo actually run? So long road ahead of us.
Yeah, it certainly is going to be a long road. That does it for us today. Our thanks to Joe Crowley and Lauren Tomlinson. Thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power. And coming up tomorrow, we'll be speaking with John Kirby, obviously the coordinator for strategic communications at the National Security Council. What does he have to say? The latest that's going on. Xi just leaving Moscow.
And TikTok back tomorrow.
Yeah, of course. More on China, more on TikTok.
You said it.
This is Bloomberg. We'll see you tomorrow.